Certainly not Facebook. That's for old people like me.
I know. My daughter did use that when she was living in Japan. And it was just a data dump, basically. So
Right.
didn't have to deal with us asking for pictures. All we had to do was go to her Facebook page and
Right. Yeah.
even then it was for the old people.
Yeah. It was really so grandpa can see. Oh man.
Put this through the YouTube here. The other comments I heard about Twitter are, that these aren't product people. They're not social media people. They're venture capitalists who are running the show now, and
Yeah.
that's it's not,
Always dangerous. Well, the joke I heard back when I was doing M&A work in my brief life as an attorney was, what happens when your company merges with another one? What is it? First, you're like a mushroom. First, they keep you in the dark, then they shit on you, and then they can. And so I think whenever I hear about a venture capital, like takeover, I think, okay, so all those workers there, first they're in the dark, then all the stuff gets dumped on them, and then they're out.
And then they're out. Yeah. We'll follow up adding in here.
So I had an oddly difficult time finding a disclaimer, which I feel like I've read so many times, that an editorial writer or something is like, the views expressed are my own and not the place where I work. And so I was just trying to find some good language.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, all these legal sites have these disclaimers this long. I'm like,
Yeah.
But there is a guy who writes on Above the Law whose his little disclaimer says something like, even though my thoughts are no doubt pure gold, they're my own and not, any place where I work. And besides, I wouldn't want to share them with you anyhow. So I was trying to find that one, but then of course I couldn't find that when I was looking for it either. So my librarian chops were not kicked into gear, I guess, when I was looking for that.
Yeah, some of the sensible stuff is harder to find.
Yeah.
Back in the old days when blogging was a more credible thing for lawyers to do, though Kevin O'Keefe hopefully isn't listening to what I just said, but the disclaimer used to be, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer.
Right. Yep. I know the legal disclaimers, of course, have a lot about nothing I say constitutes legal advice and all that. And I thought, yeah, but I mean, what we're doing isn't like that. I don't think anything we could talk about could be construed as legal advice, except to the extent of we advise you that this is a good way to research this.
Right.
This topic. So I was trying to stay away from getting all into that legalese, but yeah.
The one I was wondering about, when I was at the Bar Association, it was always the email disclaimers that I read. Some of them just, you could tell that they were cut and paste jobs from other folks' disclaimers, but they were wildly, in my view, just misstatements of the law, really wildly out of place. So like the IRS disclosure, which I believe is no longer required. I saw that in a lot of emails. saw a lot of emails referencing wire the interception. I'm blanking.
Oh, really?
Communications Privacy Act, where it is a crime to intercept an electronic transmission, wire
Right.
fraud. And
But if they send it to you inadvertently,
disclaimer-
how is that? Yeah.
the disclaimer would say, Title 18 USCA, and I'm forgetting the section number,
Right.
applies to this email. Like, sure, but because you sent it to me doesn't mean I intercepted it, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
How am I criminally liable for the fact you sent me this email?
Hmm.
And just and why are you using disclaimers in email? Shouldn't you be sending, an encrypted message or through a client portal? Or why are
Right.
you sending confidential information through email in this manner anyway? I don't know.
Yeah, I remember those footers that used to be kind of scoldy, and I still see them sometimes. If you have received this email in error, you must delete it immediately,
Yeah.
and tell me about it, like essentially, or you're a bad person. And I always just roll my eyes and think, whatever.
Yeah.
If I decide to delete it, it's because I'm nice or I don't care, which is 90% of the time, not because you're vaguely threatening me with this footer,
Or it's an 8-point font well below the
Right.
signature block. It says "Do not read." Right.
Right.
Now, right? Shouldn't that be at the top of the email saying "Caution, this is for one person only," and if it's not you,
Yeah.
don't read it? Yeah, I don't know. That's where the post somewhere.
Yeah. I had a patron this past week ask about returning lawyers returning client files, which comes up every once in a while.
Yeah.
And as I was browsing through, I think some ABA opinions, there was one about inadvertently adding someone to an email, and they actually give very practical email advice. If you want to CC your client into an email that you're sending to the opposing party, don't do it, because if the opposing party replies all, then you've set them up to be in direct communication with your client. So, I mean, it was of course an ABA opinion, but it had that tone of, come on, y'all, think about this a minute and just send a separate email to your client if you want them to see this information. I thought it was great.
I think Bob Ambrosi wrote about that opinion this week. Unless I'm misreading this is the snarky, I think he takes your approach here, that ethics panel tackles the weighty issue of reply all emails.
Exactly. And you have all these I don't know. I just picture these older male attorneys at the ABA getting together and saying now what happens exactly when you reply all, and trying to get it together. But yeah.
8:04. Oh my gosh, we are 4 minutes past the hour. We should get rolling.
All right.
Welcome to Gray Matters. We talk about legal research here. We try to answer the question, what was the most interesting legal research question of the week? I'm Mike Carlson. I'm a researcher at Gray Paper Legal.
I'm Karen Westwood. I'm director of the Hennepin County Law Library. Happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day, 11/11.
Yeah.
I had a good time this week on a number of research projects. Karen, what was, before I go on about myself, what was your most interesting question this week?
I don't think I had a very interesting question, except the question from my colleague, Mike Carlson, who said, I want to talk about popular names tables. And I was shocked. So I want to hear your pitch for popular name tables.
Well, I do have a pitch. I do like them, right? The reason I brought it up this week is because I had a legislative history research project this week. Somebody wanted to take a look all the way back to 1968 of all the different. Very fun project. But when but the question was about the act and not about the statute itself. So I thought, well, I need to go to the popular names table. This is a state statute. I had to go to the popular names table and find all of the sections that the act, right, the public law, is the act, which is codified in several sections of the statute typically. So the popular names table is a resource that, and I've got a screenshot here, that'll show you which section was adopted, which section of the public law was codified in the state code. And I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the popular name table for that particular act, probably because it was enacted back in 1968. And I think the popular name was truly a popular name. It wasn't the short title of the act. It was just what the media called it at the time. It was, or the local legal community called it. So I didn't find it. I Googled around for a little while, found a set of statutes that were relevant, and I used that as my foundation. But that's how I had to get the work done. I'm usually a fan of the popular name tables. I mean, those go back to the 30s even, right? I mean, you can look these up way back in time. So I was surprised I wasn't able to find it, and I don't know why. But you said you have opinions about popular names.
Well, yes. I mean, now that you explain the context, I think I understand. But I went to my staff and said, do any of you use a popular names table anymore? And they're like, no, we just Google the act. And these days, you almost always find a reference either to the statutory codification or to an act or law itself. And of course, once you have one of those pieces, you can usually move, back and forth and find the other pieces. So I said, well, so one of my colleagues said he'll use it sometimes to demonstrate to patrons how what they know of as the something Obamacare actually has a different name. But he usually pulls out the Minnesota statutes and shows them the popular names table in print. Then my other colleague said, well, you could test it out. Just pull up a popular names table and try Googling those and see what you find. So I pulled up the Maryland popular names table and I looked through the first 15 popular names. And in fact, so one thing that you probably know, Mike, is many of these popular names are like uniform laws or kind of concepts that get popular and then move from state to state. So I would, if I only searched for the popular name, I'd get these results from all over the country. So I was adding Maryland to my search. I could find all of them, except there were a couple that were a certain type that were difficult to find. So one was called Alexis's Law in Maryland. And when you type Alexis's Law into Google, you get all these law firms that feature attorneys named Alexis.
Yeah.
And you're just wading through a bunch of garbage. The other one I had a little bit of trouble with was the Anne Sue Metz Law, which indeed pulled up information that led me to it, but it was many more steps. This was, I think, also called something like the Slayer Law or something. It was a woman who'd been murdered by her husband. And while he was in jail, he sold the house and basically raided all her assets to pay for his defense. And so they passed the statute that went by a couple of names. And it was, and those articles, of course, because they were so dramatic, were the kind that you find on local news stations, and they don't give you a statutory reference. They just interview the family members. And then oddly, the Apple grade law was a little bit tricky to find because it did in Maryland. Who knew? I mean, in Minnesota, I think it would make sense to have a law about the grades of apples, but I guess they have it in Maryland too. And that again was pushing us right into their like Agriculture Department website, and it took a little bit of digging to get to. But to your point, if you're doing legislative history, that isn't as helpful because we're getting references to the current statute and act, when we Google, for the most part. I mean, the thing with Google is you never know exactly what you're getting until you go there.
I mean, what I love about that, I mean, Westlaw is usually pretty solid on these resources, I think. I mean, I looked up the CARES Act here, and it's the beauty of it is the act is codified throughout the code, not in just one title.
Right.
And the government's website doesn't give you that sort of neat breakdown. It just gives you the table of every section, whether or not it's part of the act itself.
Right.
The CARES Act, scrolling through here, I said, oh my God, it amended Title 17, which is the
Copyright Act, copyright code.
Well, super interesting. And then I have often been here to see the amending laws,
Yes.
which is super helpful. And there are times when I think ERISA especially, they'll amend the act, and who knows what they mean when they're amending the act. Are they amending the statute? And typically that's what happens.
Right.
But I've also seen it where they amend the public law, which is crazy and makes research much more difficult.
Well, those kinds of statutes are so complicated to do legislative history on. The Social Security Act and ERISA and those that have been around for a long time. And then it's hard to, like you say, track, are they amending the amended act, or are they amending an individual statute, or are they going back and trying to amend the original? Yeah, it's tough.
Not all states are like Minnesota's great. Maryland, it sounds like you had good luck there. Minnesota does have a popular names index. It's in the index itself. It's if you go to the index and just search for popular names, there is a section that gives you the popular names of each, and those are pretty helpful. It just lists the statutes that were enacted as a part of that particular act.
Right.
It's not the nice, deep, historical approach that Westlaw takes, but it's still helpful to get you to the right.
It gets you right there, and then of course you can do the annotations in Westlaw on a statute. Will often list out what the changes were over time, so you get to it eventually.
And of course, Westlaw's got version and all kinds of things. Dating, depending on the state, dating pretty far back.
I do remember before these online products, the popular names table was just a lifesaver. It was so difficult to find, these laws that people just refer to colloquially, and
How much shelf space does that product take up?
Popular names table isn't very large. It would be part of a volume.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the federal, I'm not sure. That probably was a volume or two. But for the state, it was just part of one of the index volumes. Of course, the index volumes on the state statutes have grown a lot over the years, as has the set itself. We have an appetite for more laws in the United States, I think.
One of the other things that I sort of stumbled across as somebody learning this week was statutory notes, which it's funny, when back in the day when I was a reference attorney, I had a shorthand way of explaining that and realized it was a little, I guess, well, it's quite a bit more sophisticated in the way I put it, and I didn't realize that there were whole range of types of notes in the statutes, but those you can find in the tables as well. So the table will tell you the section and just say that it's a note, that it hasn't been codified, which is interesting. So here's law, right? Here's law that's not codified in the statute, and unless you're looking at the public law, you might not be seeing it. Now, again, on Westlaw, if you're looking at the statutory notes, you will see the note reference And I found this detailed guide at uscode.house.gov.
Mm.
It gives us a deep down description of what kinds of
Oh,
statutory notes there are.
yeah.
And just this note here at the bottom, the validity of statutory notes, just says that it's law, right? Just because it hasn't been codified, don't mistake that for the fact that it's not the law, or that it's not, that it's any less of a thing, right?
Right.
But that's
right.
always the way I guess I described it. I always said it's an ministerial type of thing, or it didn't warrant classification. Have you had to describe these in any way to?
I haven't much in when I worked at Mitchell and we taught about statutes, we would talk about the process of codification and how a law goes into effect once it's passed. That codification is really a tool to make it easier to read, to put like topics together. But in Minnesota, that brings up the question of those special laws and then laws of general application. So, and then back in the day, the legislature used to pass these private laws, right? Do you know
I don't know
those?
No, I don't know.
So those would be, and I'm not sure, I think they still do something kind of like that, but they're not called private laws. But like if someone had a claim against the government and the legislature would be like, yeah, okay. They're not going to codify that. And also a lot of the budgetary bills that get passed don't change the code, but it's still the law that the budget appropriations are going to go this way. But that isn't really the private law. The private law would be,
that's right.
The railroad or an inmate or something, making a direct appeal to the legislature.
I've never had a research project that involved looking for that though. But I remember the looking for the budget. Oftentimes I've had to search for that and go, why isn't it in the code? Well, we're not codifying.
Right. Can you imagine if that got codified every year?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that kind of rocked my world back in the day when I realized that the legislature is taking all these actions that then weren't
right.
Right. Yeah.
And I very rarely have I bumped up against a situation that was like, oh man, I wish I knew that, right? Or I have worked with some folks who were frustrated because they found the note sort of later on. But typically, it's the short title or the effective date, things like that. Some additional, but some of it's a little bit more substantive. Some of it's longer text but I'll make sure to drop this link. Notes.
And sometimes I think even if you're not doing a legislative history, if there's something about a statute that is counterintuitive or it's difficult to understand what they're getting at, if you look at the notes, once in a while you get some indication of why they added a section. And in some cases, they'll even have an editor note that'll say, this was changed in this year, for this reason. And then when you go back to read the statute, it can be a little clearer. So they can be helpful. The editor's comments on a private vendor's site, but then also these notes.
Yeah, construction, I assume, meaning how to read the statute, for example. And then I think there was a note in here too, that findings of Congress or some of the stuff that you'll read in the introductory material of a bill is entered in here. So the findings, congressional findings. Also included sometimes in the notes.
And that's super helpful.
But unless you're looking at the notes, which is in the act, not in the codified statute.
Yeah. Well, okay, Mike, I think you've convinced me that the popular name table, particularly when doing legislative history research, is a handy thing. Or even if you're not doing a full-on legislative history project, often as not, someone wants the state of the law in a given year, and then to use a popular names table from that version of the statute should direct you right there.
Yeah, the example I brought up in Minnesota was, that's current. It's not historical necessarily, but it does. The revenge pornography statute in Minnesota is actually in several different sections. So 604.30 and 31, but also in section 617. So it's not necessarily all organized in the same section of the statute. So if you want to know what the act is and what the relevant sections are, now they probably reference one another. It actually took me a little while to find an example of a one that just wasn't sequential, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are spread throughout the. To know about the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act. I always hate these mnemonics.
The USA Patriot Act was so torture.
Yeah.
So are we able to take a look at the code that you mentioned that you couldn't find? I also Googled and I found it had a different popular name. Did you notice that?
Which one was that?
It was Georgia. You were looking for, remind me, it was.
I was looking for the First Offenders Act.
First Offenders Act, but when I Googled it, it said it went into effect, back in 1968, but now is commonly called the Georgia Second Chance Act. Or Second Strike Act or something. I thought, oh, well, one popular name then was just replaced by another. And if you looked up the other popular name, you were in like Flynn. But it's interesting to me that there wasn't a cross-reference on the popular name table. That would have been great.
I double checked this morning on Westlaw just to make sure I didn't miss it. And I don't think I did, and I don't know, maybe, and they're probably relying on what, I'm not sure, actually in that case, if they're looking to the title of the original act, and that wasn't available on Westlaw, right? I had to go to a government e-library database from Georgia to do a PDF search into these big documents to get back to 1968. Super fun.
I do think the legislative drafting has changed over time, so that short titles now they'll say, this act may be referred to as this, also known as, and they'll throw in some of the colloquial ones like the person's name, Megan's Law or whatever, where in the past, boy, you used to really, even with a popular names table, it was sometimes difficult to figure out, what it really was because it wasn't actually mentioned anywhere in the statute.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. If that, it was less of a political activity, where you had to popularize, and popular name is, makes sense to have, but popularizing it is something like the Patriot Act, which is it was interesting to see. The political history is really what you got a view of the First Offender Act, because there are all these second chance law. The penalties against you, could be expunged even though it was a felon. But there
if
were
it was your first time,
that were built in over time. So, drunk driving, sex offenders, child pornography, that second chance, it was updated as time went on, as it became politically untenable for certain felons to get that second chance. So it was an interesting, very interesting project.
I bet it was, Mike.
The Georgia statute, the Minnesota statutes are pretty amazing. It's a great website. If you, just Google your way over there.
You're on the reviser's website. Yeah, I love it.
Everything.
Yep.
Georgia has just a very bare bones Lexis tool. also famously the part of a Supreme Court case. Copyright law, where they,
Oh, the popular names table was part of that?
the Georgia statutes. the
Oh,
official
yes,
version
the
of
Georgia statutes, yeah.
Published by Alexis,
Yeah.
which had the annotations on it. They said that's the official version. So you had to pay for the official version.
Yeah,
You could get the text of the statute for free, but not the text of the statute with the annotations.
right.
The official version was locked down under copyright and Supreme
Right.
Court. That's
Right, and that's problematic. If you make the annotations official, you've just embarked on a whole different scheme, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know? Yeah,
yeah.
Georgia.
Georgia. I love Georgia. I've heard that from other researchers. They're like, God, Minnesota is great. Some states are really great. Some it sounds like Maryland was a good resource for you. But yeah, a lot of them are much more bare bones.
Oh, yeah. No, Minnesota has long had a great legislative website. I feel like our statutes were available before others. They went through a whole process to make those the official statutes, the online version. You can authenticate the statute online and download it to this is the true copy of an official statute, which all seems like a bunch of kind of wonky sort of details until you're trying to cite or submit something that has to be official. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm so glad Minnesota does this.
And that's just a link in the upper right-hand corner, right?
Yep.
That all I need
Yep.
to do is click the authenticate link,
Yep.
choose the file, and then I'm done. It's pretty
Yep.
cool.
And then it has that ability to have a PDF version, which is super for printing. You go on some of these state statutory websites and you get these weird run-on pages with bizarre page breaks and goofy formatting. And then again, you're just grateful that you can click PDF and print and you're good to go in Minnesota.
Is Minnesota law, and I'm gonna embarrass myself by not remembering the correct terminology, but are the statutes affirmative law? I know portions of the US code that typically the statute is prima facie evidence of the law, right? That it's just, as you say, a codification, topically organized. But there are sections of the US code which are affirmative law, which you can rely on as the law. It's not, you don't have to go back to the
in which Congress has declared to be that, right? Isn't that the process that they? I don't know that there is that concept in Minnesota, Mike, but now I'm just going to advertise my ignorance too. I mean, it's a familiar federal law concept. Yeah. That might be a, yes, well, maybe you find the answer and drop it in the notes, right? I'm going to have to punt.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right. Well, again, that's a question I've never been asked, right? That's never been something that I've stumbled across, just in.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that we're talking about authenticating, I mean, what's the value about getting the authenticated version here? What do I get? How would I use this in practice?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know, I feel like some people, well, I don't know though. I was going to say use it when they're actually submitting paperwork, maybe not to a court. But now I'm trying to think, but where else are you submitting a copy of a statute? We'll do a little more investigation on.
I mean, that's my understanding, is that if you're going to cite, if there's a question about the meaning or the currentness of the statute in a submission to the court, then you would need to authenticate it. But there's got to be very, otherwise you're just citing the statute, right? You're quoting it, citing it. That's
right.
Okay, so we have two bits of homework here. Just to,
yes, 2 follow-ups. We should write out our script more completely, Mike.
That's great. That's great, though. That's next week we'll report back to our faithful listeners. Well, all right, very cool. Well, Karen, thanks again for everything. You have anything we should be looking out?
Oh, you just froze on me, Mike.
What's happening?
Oh, I don't know that anything exciting is coming up in the world of research or programming or anything. I'll keep my eye out.
All right, good.
All right. Great.
Yeah, so I'm just looking forward to, a grand cold weekend.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Look for snow.
all right.
All
We'll
right.
be
Great.
next week with the most interesting legal research question of the week. Feel free to reach out to me directly at Gray Paper Legal. It can be reached at mike@graypaperlegal.com. That's Gray with an A, mike@graypaperlegal.com. If you've got a question you want us to handle, feel free to send it to us. We'd be very happy to answer your legal research question with Karen. So have a great weekend, Karen.
You too, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, are you done?
No.
I don't know how to turn this off here. Here we go.
Yeah, I can't leave, Mike. I'm trying to say goodbye.
All right. Here we go. All right, we'll see you.
All right.
Thanks again.